Welcome to Module 3 of It's Not Really Over. As much as this course is about death, dying, grieving, and learning about the afterlife, the underbelly of this course is surrounded around mental health. It happens to be May in the United States, which is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I felt like it was really important to have a module around the 5 stages of grief specifically, to dive deeper into each of those stages, to give you buzzwords about each of those stages so you can spot what stage you are in, your loved one is in, whatever it may be, and to really help fuel the conversations around mental health and how it's so important for us to tend to our invisible wounds. Before we go into the main curriculum of this course, I do want to share a personal story I have around grief and mental health. In fall 2018, I was about to experience one of the busiest death seasons of my life. It first began with a distant relative losing her life, and then it ended with my baby nephew, Fitz, losing his life. In between both of those deaths, I also lost both of my family pets, a cat named Cabo and a black Labrador retriever named Cash. Cash had been with our family for 15 and a half years. To help close the gap on the grieving process, I attended a funeral for my cousin's grandmother that was the distant relative that passed away. Unfortunately, attending her funeral didn't do much for me. For Cabo, because his death was so tragic and sudden, I didn't have the opportunity to say goodbye to him. Instead, I went to a nearby church where I worked at the time, and I tried to pay tribute to him there. It wasn't working either. After Cash hurt himself and really fell and was on the brink of death, I chose to go home to be with him in his final days. And I'm so happy that I was with him when he took his final breath. But still, that was just a very gut-wrenching loss that nothing really was giving at the time. And then finally, after learning that Fitz was born and then died an hour later, a couple days after his death, I decided to come back to St. Louis, my hometown, to support my family, especially my sister, my brother-in-law, and their 2 daughters. But what I didn't do during those 4 deaths was seriously assess where I was at in the grieving process. Because they occurred so close to one another, the grief started to pile up, and I felt very lost in the process. I felt like I was also fighting the process. I wasn't embracing it. It got so bad that I didn't even know what I was feeling at times. I didn't even recognize myself. I felt like I didn't even know myself anymore. It also made it a lot harder to understand what I truly needed. Maybe I needed a mental health day, but I never gave it to myself because I was not educated on the stages of grief. Like Hopper, I was in a deep, dark cave. And now, after being out of that deep, dark cave, I am called to make a course around death, dying, grieving, and learning about the afterlife so I can help people that were in the same position as me. It is so important to learn the stages of grief and also be open to talking about mental health. So I hope that sharing this personal story helps you understand that you are not alone. So with that, let's dive a little deeper in each stage of grief, and I'll share common scenarios, buzzwords that could play out during each stage. Like in Module 2, I will list the number associated with each stage, the title of each stage, and then I will share buzzwords associated with each stage of grief. Let's go ahead and begin. So the first stage is denial. The buzzwords associated with this stage are shock, survival mode, confusion, elation, fear, avoidance, numbing, and isolation. The second stage of grief is anger. A few buzzwords associated with this stage are frustration, irritation, and anxiety. The third stage is bargaining. These buzzwords and phrases are struggling to find meaning, reaching out to others, telling one's story. The fourth stage of grief is depression. And those buzzwords are overwhelmed, helplessness, hostility, fight, suppressed sadness. And the final stage of grief is acceptance. And those buzzwords are exploring options, new plan in place, moving forward, not on. As you can tell, with each title of grief, the buzzwords associated with each title of grief are not really the same. Would you have ever thought that in the stage of anger, there comes anxiety? Or in the stage of depression, there comes fight or hostility? It just shows that grieving is not a linear process. It comes and it goes. And so it's really, really important to understand the buzzwords associated with grief because they're so different and unique in each stage. With that, it is also crucial to understand common symptoms of grief, which are not limited to the following: crying, headaches, difficulty sleeping, questioning the purpose of life, questioning your spiritual or religious beliefs, feelings of detachment, isolation from friends and family, abnormal behavior, worry, anxiety, frustration, guilt, fatigue, anger, loss of appetite, aches and pains in the body, and stress. So far, I've shared a lot of information with you, and I hope that you're still able to follow along and feel like this is powerful information that can help you heal in the grieving process. I recently just listed off some common symptoms of grief, but now what I want to show you is a technique, a practice, a ritual that was shown to me by a therapist of mine before I started grieving all these deaths. Now, this came when mental health started to become a priority in my life. And I felt like this was really helpful for me when I was faced with a lot of overwhelming emotions. I'm a very emotive person. And if you're into astrology, I'm a Scorpio. So I am a water sign, which is typically dealing with our emotions, the subconscious mind, the psychological realm of life. And being a Scorpio and having a Scorpio stellium in my natal birth chart, I understand that emotions are really the way that we know how we are feeling. So, what I'm going to show to you is actually an emotions wheel. This is one that I created not too long ago at the start of Ruby Jade Rituals. If you follow the social media on Ruby Jade Rituals, you'll find this. And I used a source online, and it's very easy to look up online yourself. You just type in emotions wheel. But this is a very powerful tool to use when you do have overwhelming emotions, which definitely come and go when we're grieving someone's death. So having something like this is really, really useful. If you're first seeing something like this, it might be overwhelming, but let me explain to you how it works. And if you ever wanted to pull down an emotions wheel yourself, you can find one online very easily, or you can go to my social page at Ruby Jade Rituals to pull this specific one down. So, how it works is as you move from the center to the outer edges of the wheel, you'll find more specific feelings. Having more complex emotional states to choose from can help you really get to the heart of your feelings when basic emotions just don't cut it. Now, this goes back to when I mentioned that some of the titles of the stages of grief don't really match buzzwords, or grief, maybe you'll be surprised with the symptoms coming out of grief, like body aches and loss of appetite. You would think that wouldn't really happen. So, just like any type of emotion, if you can get really, really detailed with it, it's really beneficial. And so that is why I wanted to present this emotions wheel. And as much as the human race hates to admit it, death is a part of life. In astrology, it's taught that there is no life without death, and that Aries begins the life cycle, and that Pisces closes that cycle out. Just like an emotions wheel, the zodiac wheel is a circle. It's the circle of life. And in that circle of life, there is death. Grieving is an ongoing process. In fact, we are practically grieving our entire life. We say goodbye to people, places, or things the moment we are born into this world, onto this earth. Ultimately, life and death are one and the same. If you just had a gut-wrenching goodbye, or you are currently experiencing a psychological death, I feel you, and I have been there before, countless of times. And you will be there as well, countless of times, because that is the circle, the cycle of life. My best piece of advice for you is to be patient and to surrender to whatever you're feeling. To feel is to heal. Embrace the darkness. You won't be here forever because, like the moon, grief waxes and wanes. Hey, you've made it to the end of Module 3. I know that this module was very knowledge heavy. However, I feel like all this knowledge is so important and so crucial. Now, the learning doesn't stop here. I want you to have practices in place where you embed the knowledge I present. So this module, like you expected, will be practice ritual heavy as well. The first practice I want you to do is to use an emotions wheel, similar to what I presented in this module. Now you can go online and print one off, or you can create an emotions wheel like I did. Whichever way you choose is fine, but you're going to be using this emotions wheel in the other practices of this module. All right. So after you create your emotions wheel, what I want you to do is go back to Module 2's practice, where you gauged where you were at in the grieving process. You gave yourself the number of each grieving stage. But what I want you to do is to work on this particular practice a little bit more. I want you to provide recent behavior that you've displayed to better illustrate where you're at in the process. And then what I want you to do is to take your emotions wheel and to list off any emotions that you could attach to that behavior. And also, you can use some of the buzzwords presented in the module and some of the symptoms I read off to kind of help accentuate your illustration of grief. Overall, the main goal of this practice is to really get a handle on what you're actually feeling. Remember, to feel is to heal, and we really need to gauge where we're at so we know what we need. The next practice is creating a morning ritual. A morning ritual was first presented to me by my business coach, Natalia Benson. She is a modern mystic and an astrologist and a woman's empowerment coach. And she was my first business coach for Ruby Jade Rituals. When I went through her 5-month container, she really encouraged all of us to create a morning ritual, making a ritual that encompasses the mind, body, and soul. So, what I want you to do as we are building blocks of how to, grieve in a more healthy way and to have mental health at our top priority is I want you to create a morning ritual that hits the mind, the body, and the soul. So, what you'll find in this module are a few examples of what you can use to create your own morning ritual. So, I'm going to list off Natalia Benson's method, and then you're going to come up with some of the things that you enjoy the most. And you'll see how creating this ritual is going to be very unique to you. And then once you start doing it, you're going to notice that you're setting yourself up for success each day. And when we're grieving, sometimes it's really hard to get out of bed. But after you incorporate a morning ritual, you're going to see that you're going to start moving forward. Remember, the goal is to move forward, not on. And so we can't reverse what happened after your loved one passed away, but we can really move forward and come up with a ritual that will help us kind of do that each and every day because, each day might be harder. Each day might be easier. It just really depends kind of where you're at and what you're feeling. So definitely do this morning ritual after you've created your emotions wheel and you revisited the practice of module 2. The final practice is I want you to log how you're feeling once you've begun your morning ritual. I want you to see how you're changing and how you're moving forward in the grieving process. So, some of the questions that you can ask yourself when you're logging, how you're feeling after embedding that morning ritual every morning is how are you finding light in your life amidst the current darkness? Even if it is little, write it down. Everything counts at this point. Those little sparkles of light will remind you to keep going. Last but not least, to close this module, I want to share a reminder with everyone. The reminder is that grief is different for everyone. It does not have a definite timeline. It can hit you at different times and come in waves similar to the ocean tide. It may take longer for you to grieve than others, but that is perfectly fine.